In this video we are going to learn that how to configure and use state server session management. Now before we do that, first let us try to understand that why it is needed to store the session data into the state server and what is the use of it. Basically, when we store the session information in inproc, it means on the web server, what happens is that as soon as your application restart or crashes, your session data is also lost. And this is fine for the normal website, but in case you are storing some very critical data related with the user or related with the customer into the session variable, and after crashing of the application that session data is also lost, then this may be a very big problem for you. So in order to avoid this kind of scenario where even if our application is crashing or restarting, the session data should not lose, we can store those session data into the different process altogether. And in this we are going to learn that. So in order to do that, what we will do is that first we will enable the session state, ASP.NET Session State Service, because when we use the state server session management, all the data is stored into the another process of ASP.NET State Server, and that runs on your machine automatically as a service. So first let me tell you how to go and enable your ASP.NET Session State. So in order to run the ASP.NET State Server service, you can right click, manage, right click the my computer or computer icon and click on the manage, and then click on services and applications. From the left panel, click on services, and here you will get one service named ASP.NET State Service. By default it might be stopped. So what you can do is that you can double click it, and here start tab you can write automatic start, and then you can start it. Okay, once you will start it, then you will be able to store the data into this ASP.NET State Service. So this is the only one step that you need to follow wherever you want to store your session data into the ASP.NET State Service. Now once you have done that, then you are done with the first step. Now the second step is to configure your web.config file to use the state server as your session data storage. So for that, what we need to do is that we need to use the session state tag under the system.web in our web.config file. So let me add that. Now here what we are doing is that we are writing session state and mode is equal to state server. You can see that in the mode you will have many values. For example, you can have custom, inproc, off, SQL Server, state server. Inproc is by default. If you not specify anything, by default it will be inproc. It means that the session data is stored into the web server memory. Here, because we are going to use a state server, so we are setting as a state server, mode equal to a state server, and then you will have to specify the state connection string. A state connection string is basically specified with a TCP is equal to and the IP address of the machine where you want to store the session data. It can be your local machine, or it can be altogether different machine connected into your network. So for example, if this laptop is connected with a network, then what I can do is that instead of this local host, I can specify my different machine IP address with the port, and when we will store the data, then what will happen is that the session data will be stored into that particular machine ASP.NET State Service process. Now before you do that, you will have to make sure that the ASP.NET State Service is running on that computer, otherwise you will not be able to store the data. Here, because I am using on the same machine, so I have used here localhost, and then I have specified 424242, that is my port number. And then you can specify a state network timeout. For example, if it is taking more than 10 seconds to connect to this particular machine, then it will basically time out. So you can either increase it or decrease it. It is up to you. Once we have done that, means once you have specified the session state mode and the state connection string and the state network timeout, then you are done with this. Now the next step is to follow the same approach that we had followed to store the data into the session in case we had used the in-proc session management. So I already have the code here that we had used through the last how-to, where we are basically executing the get data method under the page load if it is not each post back, and then we are getting the data from the database, storing into the session, and we are specifying the timeout and setting the data table as the details view data source, and then calling the data bind. And if the second time this particular page will be requested, then it is checking for that session, and if it is not null, then simply unboxing the data stored into the session to the data table, and that's it. So now let me run this page. So I'm running this page now, and actually first time the data will come from the database. So getting data from database, when I will refresh, then you can see that getting data from session is coming. So next time the data is coming from the session. Now in order to prove that our session data is being stored into the state server, what we will do is that we will do one practical. So let me close my existing browser and let me run this page. Now when I am running this page, you will see that first time the data is coming from the database, and when I am refreshing this page, then next time it is coming from the session variable. Now let me change the web.config file a little bit and save it. Now because the web.config file has been changed, so ideally this application is restarting. So when the application is restarting, then the data should come from the database if you would have stored the session into the in-proc way, but here it will still come from the session. See here, it is coming from the session, coming data from session. Okay, now let me disable it. So when I will disable it, now what will happen? The default is that the data will be stored into the in-proc session, right? It means that web server memory. And now I am running the browser again. Now first time it is coming from the database, second time it is coming from the session. And now when I will change the web.config file and run the application, you can see that it will again come from the database. See, and from the second time again it is coming from the session. So this concept proves that when the application is restarting after changing the web.config file, in-proc basically destroy the session, and after hitting the page, it is again getting the data from the database and storing to the session. But in case of the out-proc session, what is happening? We because the data is being stored into the altogether different process, so even if our application is restarting, the session data is not lost. Okay, the session data remains into that particular state server, and when we are refreshing the page, the data comes from the session instead of from the database.